Perfect. All right. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. We're just giving it about 1 minute for people to kind of log in. I see some people coming in the waiting room right now. So we're just going to wait about 1 minute here and we'll get things started. I hope everyone's day is going cooler than mine. It's 96 degrees out here in Florida, so it's pretty hot.
Yeah, we're about the same. I'm in Albuquerque and we've been touching 100 pretty much every day, which is not really that common. We usually stay in the low 90s, so it's been hotter than usual for us.
Oh, yeah, it's dry heat too. All right, everyone, we gave it about a minute here. We're still expecting some more people to join us here, but in the meantime, with respect to time, we'll go ahead and get started. Once again, thank you for joining us today. This is the first installment of our new Cyber Series Roundtable discussions to address growing concerns, growing threats of different things that are plaguing our cyber community, things like ransomware, things like malware, things of that nature. My name is Fred Augustin. I am a network solutions consultant with TruGrid, and today we'll be discussing cybersecurity lessons for safer remote work. The discussion will be recorded, so for those of you who want to go back and look at things that you may have missed or want to go back and review, you can do that. Also, please note that all the microphones for the attendees will be muted by default, just to cut down on some background or ambient noise, okay? This is not going to be a formal webinar, okay? This is more of a informal roundtable discussion that we're having with some industry experts and thought leaders. So if you do have any questions during the course of this discussion, I don't want to say presentation, it's more of a discussion, feel free to write them in the box there at the bottom. You have a chat box and you have a Q&A box. We'd prefer that you jot your questions down in the Q&A box. That way, it'll go a little bit more smoothly as far as our back-end moderator to review the questions and announce them at the appropriate time, okay? So, it's very evident that the concept of remote work or work from home is pretty much here to stay. The cat's out of the bag, so to speak. It's more than just a short-term trend. Now, of course, in the mad dash for companies to scale their remote access capabilities and ensure that their business continues continuity, a lot of sacrifice has been made in the name of security hygiene, and that leaves them open to a number of attacks. So these vulnerabilities have led to a rash of recent cyber attacks in businesses and even government organizations. Now, the most menacing of these attacks, ransomware. We hear about it all the time, all over the news. Big companies are getting hit with ransomware. The vast majority of companies, believe it or not, don't even get reported. You have hundreds of small and medium-sized businesses every day that are getting hit with ransomware. Their files are being abducted, so to speak. Their backups, their repositories, everything. And they're paying tens of thousands of dollars, hundreds of thousands, even millions of dollars, okay? So the problem that we're facing, of course, is when you have a larger scale attack like this, kind of like we saw earlier last month with the Colonial Pipeline attack, you've got the repercussions even entering the public sector. People are making mad dashes to the gas station, and all these crazy things that are happening because of ransomware attack. I heard that Edward Don, the food service supplier, was attacked just last week. And of course, we have all over the country, our infrastructure, I feel, is ill prepared to deal with these attacks. You've got facilities. Just today, I heard about a facility out in California, a water treatment facility that was attacked by ransomware. So what can be done to mitigate or even prevent some of these attacks from happening altogether? Well, here to discuss our panel of industry experts and cybersecurity thought leaders, we have with us Mr. Dick Wilkinson, the Chief Technical Officer for the state of New Mexico Supreme Court. Hello, Dick. Good to have you. And we also have Mr. Peter Ayedun, CEO of the innovative zero trust remote access firm, TruGrid. How are you doing today, Peter?
Thank you, Fred. I'm doing great.
Awesome, awesome. So we also have on the line Mr. Jerry Rasmussen. I'm not sure if you can hear us, Jeremy, but he's the CTO of the cybersecurity powerhouse, Abacode. Jeremy, are you there with us?
In the chat, it says that he seems to be trapped over in observer land instead of land. So
no problem. I'm sure he'll chime in at some point. No worries. No worries. So guys, I've heard a lot of things, a lot of stories from companies, that have been hacked through vulnerabilities of infrastructure, things like using standard RDP ports or, exploiting open tunnels in VPN access. So based on your experience, what are you seeing the risks are in terms of remote work? What are you observing out in the field when it comes to remote work and risk of being attacked? Dick, let's start with you.
Well, the news stories, I know last year if you were paying any attention, you saw that your low level kind of criminal aspect of cybersecurity ticked up significantly. The people anybody that was on the criminal side of it that thought they could make a buck took advantage of the fact that people were relying on technology much more heavily in the last year, both from their professional and personal lives. So just the generic phishing attempts went through the roof, and even your more targeted or specific attacks, ransomware, which was already a scourge for the industry, just exploded as far as the types of customers and the types of industries it touched last year. So, in general, security posture for companies increased, but the bad guys kept the pressure on just the same.
I see. Makes sense. Well, Dick, in addition to working with the New Mexico Supreme Court, you're actually an official member of the Forbes Security Council. And you also served as a project manager in the U.S. Army for signals intelligence. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right. Mm-hmm.
Well, I want to say thank you for your service, first of all.
Sure. Appreciate that.
I read earlier this month that the Department of Justice is actually named. They're declared ransomware as an imminent threat to national security. So, if remote work is here to stay, what does that mean for security managers for long-term strategy?
I'd say we've got to take a look at everything that we've done over the last year, 2 years, and identify what was sort of a temporary fix. There were a lot of things that we felt like we could do a kind of a back pocket risk assessment, and say, okay, we get it. It was big blocks. Is it big risk, low risk, and let's move. I think it's time to go back and look at all of that, look at those decisions you made over the last year. Hopefully you documented some of them, and you can reevaluate. You can break out your real risk matrix, your real risk assessment kind of tools that you normally use, and decide, can I tolerate this risk? Was my plan sound? And how do I turn this temporary plan into a permanent plan? How do I turn those controls that are temporary in nature into something that is repeatable? I think that's really the critical step for security managers right now.
Great advice. Peter, would you like to add anything to that?
Well, I think for me personally, I think in terms of lessons learned in the last year related to cybersecurity lessons for remote work, one of the things that we've talked about is the need for MFA for all logins, that nobody should be logging into any remote access solutions without multi-factor authentication. Well, some of the things that we're learning over the last year, we've had 3 companies approach us after a breach in the last 6 to 7 months, where those breaches are actually coming over VPN. And in 2 of those cases, we have employees using company-issued laptops, okay? And which is expected over VPN. But the attack unusually did not come from the VPN gateway directly. These attacks actually coming from the home network of the employees in question, even though they're using company issued laptops, okay? And I believe in one of those cases, the attack happened through some other device that was compromised on the home Wi-Fi, and the threat pretty much got on the employee's business issued laptop, which is supposed to have all of the attendant security. And subsequently, because the VPN tunnel was already established, the ransomware attack actually traveled over the VPN tunnel and infected the company's network. So those are some of the new things that we're seeing that we're not seeing them reported, in the public domain just yet, but it kind of is logical that that could happen. That if you have a laptop on a home Wi-Fi and that home Wi-Fi get compromised, attack could really spread over the established VPN tunnel. As a matter of fact, Gartner released a document, I believe, in August, October of 2019. Hey, Jeremy, welcome aboard. So I'm gonna let you introduce Jeremy after my
Of course, yeah, absolutely.
So in that situation, so Gartner has already made a point that they believe that by 2023, over 60% of organizations will junk their current VPN in favor of zero trust solutions, okay? So in that regard, in terms of lessons learned, this is kind of what we're seeing on our side, on the TruGrid side, where customers are coming to us after they've been breached. And some of those breaches are coming over company issued laptops. So that's pretty much something that I want people to be concerned about. So the question then becomes, what should you do? For our listeners, what I would recommend we're saying is that, first of all, if you're going to be doing VPN over a corporate issued laptop, which is the norm, make sure you're not using split tunnel. Because if you're using split tunnel, you're essentially allowing your employees to get internet access from their home network. And you still have another tunnel that goes to your company network. So they could really, when they're going to their home Wi-Fi internet access, that wouldn't have your normal security layers that you'll have in the office, right? In that situation, they could easily bring compromised data in that can affect the laptop. The other thing I would like to recommend to our audience is that they probably should not be having corporate issued laptops that have file sharing enabled. If you have Windows file share enabled on a home Wi-Fi, anything can happen to it. So those two things are very critical. And if you're doing RDP over VPN, you should look at other solutions that can do a better job of it instead of doing over VPN. So that's kind of one of the things that we're learning right now, Fred.
Interesting. Yeah. I have kind of a stupid question, but I think sometimes people think that there's a difference. You mentioned that they were on the company Wi-Fi. Would it matter at all if they were plugged in, hardwired into the computer?
So in this case, it's company issued laptops, but on home Wi-Fi. So it's not company Wi-Fi. So it'd be more. Now, I've seen organizations that are very high security. They would recommend a dedicated device that would actually be plugged into the home Wi-Fi, and that's what the laptop connects to. But because of the high cost of that additional security layer, many companies don't do it. Many companies truly believe that by issuing company laptop that has antivirus or the other stuff on it, it should be good enough, right? In most cases, it might be good enough if they're not doing split tunneling. But if you have those things and you're doing split tunneling, you're still exposed. Now remember, even organizations that have the highest of security, they still get breached. So even having corporate issued laptops with no split tunneling, with everything going through the company network, doesn't guarantee you'll not be infected. And I think in a prior conversation, Dick and I were talking about some of the things he's learned, which he's going to share with us. It has nothing to do with technology. It's more about human side of things that are actually more important than just layering technology upon technology. So that doesn't in and of itself solve a lot of things. So that's a long way, but it doesn't solve everything. Appreciate
that. Jeremy, welcome. Thank you for joining us. We do appreciate you taking the time. I know you're a very busy man. I've gained a lot of insight, a lot of knowledge from your various webinars. on cybersecurity. You were named Tampa Bay's Technology Leader of the Year back in 2017. And in one of your latest sessions, you mentioned that the majority of attacks are actually coming from misconfigured remote access. Please elaborate for our audience a little bit more about what that means and some of the things that can be done to prevent those types of attacks.
Sure. Just to bring some real world flair to your webinar, the reason I didn't have my act together joining is I was just coming from a DFIR, digital forensics and incident response engagement, where somebody had a VPN misconfiguration with split tunnel. So I knew Peter would be excited to hear that.
How's that even
Amazingly enough, right? I did not make this stuff up. This just happens in real time. So yeah, there's absolutely been a lot of challenges that we've seen since COVID and work from home that have made. I mean, the notion of a well-defined perimeter and everything inside the perimeter and everything goes through the firewall. That kind of pie in the sky notion has been going away for years, ever since we've had, cloud computing, software as a service, social media, things like that. It's even exacerbated all the more when we have, Zoom meetings and Teams and GoToMeeting and all that. And so the whole idea of zero trust or having, it's not just a buzz phrase anymore for the industry. It's something we need to be thinking about. The new kind of normal is assume somebody's already in your environment. They're already in your network. You can't trust that device. You can't trust that connection. And so you have to think segmentation. You need to think multi-factor authentication everywhere. You need to think continuous monitoring everywhere. And that's how we kind of get our arms around it. You're exactly right. We work with, we do digital forensics and investigations amongst other services, managed services. We don't want to do DFIR ever, because that means somebody's messed up and now we're cleaning up afterwards. But we would like to be proactive and have protections in place beforehand. But unfortunately, people make mistakes, and then we have to help them, dig out from that. And we never want to run into a situation where we have to work with a negotiation on a ransomware decryption key. But we had to do that recently. And one of the companies we engaged was called Coveware, some former law enforcement folks. They actually do the negotiation with the ransomware gang. They help facilitate the payment through Bitcoin, through a Bitcoin wallet and all that stuff.
Okay.
Obviously, nothing I would never recommend paying a ransom, but if it has to be done, we have a source to do that. And these guys said over the last year, 62.5% of all ransomware attacks that they worked on came from remote desktop misconfiguration. Okay. So the second way was, phishing and social engineering, as you might have guessed. And then the third was just deprecated services. We saw this too, where people are running some old version of PHP code on their website, or they're running some old, Windows Server 2003 that's public facing and can't be, updated with patches, or they're running an old Exchange server that's unpatched, things like that. But for the most part, it's, port 3389, remote desktop misconfiguration, and allowing, not whitelisting it so that it comes in, allowing it to come in connections from anywhere, not limiting the number of, connection attempts, not adding any kind of wrapping around that where it goes, forced to a bastion host and with multi-factor authentication, VPN protection and so forth. So unfortunately, that's just, you're just opening the floodgates for attackers that way.
Understood. And for those of you who are just joining us, that is Jeremy Rasmussen. He's the CTO for the cybersecurity powerhouse Abacode. So those of you who don't know Abacode, they're a huge company. They are very integral when it comes to not only recovering from an attack, but also helping to prepare and prevent from one from even happening. So we're excited to have you, Jeremy. Dick, the majority of things that are shifting to a remote environment after COVID, many organizations are actually struggling with changes of behavior and online etiquette, right? When it comes to remote employees, what are some of the lessons that you've learned about, transitioning from people working at home versus working in the office?
Well, I don't take a lot of specific kind of measurement points or data points around my security profile to make my CISO sweat. I don't make him dream up charts all day, but I do talk to him often so that I get that input from him. And I know last year, our biggest shift for us was being in the courts, working in the courts or working for the government in general is usually a very in-person experience. So our employees are their mindset is, I'm at work in a government building. This is important work. This is a serious place. When you take those people and you take that same work, but you do it somewhere else, you don't do it inside a courthouse, which is clearly a very kind of a presence, in your life when you're inside that building, and
Right.
you're now sitting at a coffee shop or your couch in your living room. Some of that idea of I'm at work doing serious, important things it just gets vacated from that person's mind. And so while they're working, they are engaged in other activities and they're just not paying as much attention to the interactions that they have with their information. They're interacting with their work system the same way that you would interact with your personal computer. And it shifts their level of security mindset inside that employee. Am I acting like an employee or am I just acting like myself right now? And if you're sitting on your couch, you're more likely to just act like yourself. And that person makes more mistakes than an employee who takes their work very seriously. So we noticed that sure enough, our touch point for that was our own internal phishing training attempts that we do. We run pseudo phishing attacks and then we have our employees report back. And sure enough, the trend, that was the first indicator for us that the behavior itself had changed. That the trends on that, where groups that we had tested before started to sort of double their click rate of malicious links, we realized right away it's because I'm very likely to click on the Cheerios ad that's in my computer right next to the computer that I'm doing my work on. So, that click behavior changed, and it was purely down, we think, to the environment that the employee was just working in.
Wow. And for those of you who caught that, he said pseudo training. He didn't mean like a Linux joke, right? It was actual like fake.
Not super.
Good one.
So, Peter, I know that you have decades of experience when it comes to IT security. You've been a consultant for various Fortune 100 companies, and you're also the CEO, obviously, of a high-tech remote access security firm. So, tell us some of the real-world examples that you have seen when it comes to remote access. Maybe some of the carelessness that has happened. I've talked to a number of folks myself, and it seems like, as long as everything is working, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And they kind of fall victim over time to one thing or another. But what are some of the real world examples that you're running into?
The most obvious ones is the one I discussed earlier with people thinking by issuing corporate laptops to employees, it then means that everything's fine. As I just learned from a real world situation with Jeremy, you have misconfigured VPN tunnel where they're using split tunnel. And so with a corporate issue laptop, you really still can invite ransomware into your corporate issue laptops without the security to safeguard it because it's coming from a different gateway, not the company gateway. So that's the one that's actually more common that we're seeing. After people get breached, they start looking for a solution to prevent RDP over VPN tunnel. And sometimes they find us and then we help them get onboarded. I would say that many organizations have already realized that if you're going to use RDP over VPN, you definitely should not be given VPN to a non-corporate issue laptops. In other words, if the company doesn't own the laptop, it's just malpractice, right? To put company VPN on there. But I want our audience to now know that even when you have company issue laptops, you really have to do it with care. As Jeremy said, 60% of over 62% or so of attacks come through misconfigured RDP.
Right.
And I was surprised to find out that there are two primary reasons why people use VPN today. I've come to realize one is the file sharing to the office or accessing web services in the office. So the second popular reason is RDP over VPN, surprisingly so. And that is not to talk about people that just exposed at 389, which is in and of itself is malpractice. But more than anything else, I think, like Dick had mentioned earlier, having multi-factor authentication alongside login and password should be number one thing that people should be doing, seriously, because it is very easy today for anyone to go into the dark web, the marketplace called dark web, and purchase stolen credentials. As you all learned, the attack that happened to the pipeline, the Colonial pipeline, occurred because there was an account that's no longer being used for VPN, but the credential was still being sold on the dark web. And the hackers subsequently purchased it. Somehow they got hold of the credential and they used it to attack that VPN gateway. That VPN, that account has no multi-factor authentication. So if you kind of think about it, despite them being able to get hold of the login and passwords, had it been that the account requires MFA, that'll be more difficult to actually, So I would like to tell our audience that the fact that many banks today kind of require a form of two-factor authentication should tell all of us that if you need to safeguard something of value, MFA is critically a requirement right now. So those are some of the lessons that we're learning over the past year.
MFA can be really annoying though. I mean, what can we do to kind of circumvent that?
Well,
you have to put in your password.
I'll let Jeremy and Dick weigh in, but I will say this though, that push authentication is one way to simplify it, but Dick, go ahead and weigh in, please.
Oh, no, I just, this is a little sneak peek. I'm going to be doing a whole topic about cybersecurity, the path of most resistance. And it's exactly what you're talking about, Fred, that multi-factor authentication and all the other technologies that security say are going to save us are the exact opposite of what the user experience wants to be or should be. And that we're creating hoops and gates that people have to pass through that they really don't want to pass through. And so I appreciate, Fred, that you mentioned that multi-factor. While Peter is right, we got to multi-factor everything. Users don't want it. So that's all. I'm really thinking a lot about that. So I'm glad to see it's reflected in this discussion today.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely.
If I can add to that, Fred, if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure.
We were involved with a customer, somebody who came to us after they were breached. So when they were doing they were renewing the insurance policy. Surprisingly enough, the insurance companies are now getting more critical about who they insure. So one of the questions on the application that they fill out was a requirement that every admin account or any system that will be logged into with an admin must require MFA.
Wow.
Yes, because they're realizing that when admin's account or there's any form of elevation with that MFA, it makes for an easy attack, okay? And maybe Jeremy can speak to that as well, given your IR experience.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, another issue is too many admin accounts, right? I did a pen test a couple of years ago for an insurance company, and they had 243 domain admin accounts, or accounts that had domain admin privileges. And I was like, why do you need that many? Yeah. You just need a few carefully controlled and monitored ones. So I would say, just something as simple as limiting an administrative access, disabling local admin accounts, or making sure that there's not one common local admin account that's used across all computers. That would be another good idea, because as soon as you have one, you've got access to all systems through PS Exec and some of these other tools. The other things I recommend, we've already talked about, access controls, multi-factor authentication, limiting account management. I would say, definitely implementing a formal program that regularly researches vulnerabilities and installs patches right away is huge. And not always, believe it or not, patching is still a big thing. We got called in on a forensics job for an auto parts company that had an e-commerce site. We were, we were trying to get them cleaned up, and we kept finding them owned again, right? Somebody kept creating admin accounts and kept coming in some backdoor, and we finally figured out it was their firewall itself. They were using an SSL VPN, and they had not installed the latest patch for their FortiGate 40 OS, and it had a 0 day on it that, well, I can't call it a 0 day. There was a patch available for about a year that they hadn't gotten around to installing that allowed the attackers to keep coming in. So there's some other things you can do. There's something called network level authentication that will enhance your remote access. It allows you to authenticate a user before you create a session, which is going to prevent DOS attacks from brute brute force password guessing.
Okay.
Segmentation we've already talked about. I mean, there's a million things you should do. I agree, it's daunting to have to do all these things, and there's always a trade-off between usability of a system and security, right? The most secure system is the one that's unplugged, wrapped in chains, and thrown to the bottom of the ocean, but it's not very usable. So we have to understand that whenever we come in, we want to understand what's your business mission that you need to accomplish. That's the first thing.
Right.
Then we're going to try to design things that are going to complement that and allow you to accomplish that mission. But on occasion, there will be trade-offs between usability and security. So understanding those issues and applying those controls, you're probably not going to have the internal people that even know how to do that, right? I mean, it's such a specialized thing. There's emerging threats every day. There's 500, if I go to RSA conference, Black Hat briefings, or any of these big security conferences, there's 500 vendors in the expo hall, each flogging some product that says it's going to solve your problem. But in a lot of cases, it just creates more problems. So I think there's definitely an argument to be made for bringing in an expert third party that can guide you through that process, working with them to, engage with somebody who's vendor neutral, right? Who's not just flogging a product, right? Who's not just trying to get you on some point solution. A point solution, as we said, never works. You have to have a framework. You have to have checks and balances. You have to have layers in place, and somebody who needs to see the big picture, and all of that has to support accomplishing the business mission of the company.
Excellent. And I'm sure you've seen tons of incidents like this, in your tenure with Abacode. What would you say are some of the main weak points, though, when it comes to ransomware or even the cybersecurity chain?
Right. So the White House actually put out a memo on June 2nd about some of this stuff, and whereas I felt like it was really lacking in what it was saying, it at least is trying to draw attention to some of the problems. And they were saying you should have backups, you should have network segmentation, you should have you should test your IR plan regularly. You should have a third party come in and pen test you. And then one other thing, I can't remember what it was. Oh, patching and vulnerability management. That's a great start, but that's not all you need. I really think you need a SIM and continuous monitoring. SIM, security information event management solution, is one that takes in data from all of your network servers and infrastructure, right? It's gonna pull in logs from, it's gonna bring in your firewall net flows. It's going to bring in your network infrastructure, your server logs, your endpoint protection, your cloud, even your SaaS solutions. We can draw logs in from there, aggregated in one place, run all these correlation rules on it. Some of these have 30,000 or more pre-configured rules that they're looking for, indicators of compromise. And then you have people watch it. Just having a SIM doesn't solve the problem, because you have to have somebody who makes sense of what the SIM is saying and responds to it. We had a local company, publicly traded, very large, $500 million a year company that had a SIM, and I asked them if I could log into their console. The first time I logged in, I saw 90,000 unattended alerts on there, which means they're paying 50, 60,000 a year for some software that was doing something, but it's just a noisy box that did stuff and not, there's nobody actually following up on those alerts. So you have to have the technology and the people to respond to that. What that does for you, it gives you visibility. Without that kind of visibility, you don't know what you don't know. These ransomware groups are not rocket scientists. They follow a pattern. They're always going to do some surveillance. They're going to find a foothold, drop in some malware, either through phishing you or remote desktop exploitation, or some exploiting some vulnerability. Once they get in there, they want to establish persistence, a backdoor for later. They want to try to move laterally to affect other systems. They want to escalate privileges. So they're not just an unprivileged user. They want to be admin or root. They're going to go scrape passwords. So using Mimikatz and other tools like that, they're going to try to find passwords. There's also responders, another tool we use when we're doing red teaming for collecting credentials and hashes that can be later cracked. They're going to try to establish command and control out to an external site so they can get updated instructions. They're going to stage data. They're going to look for either intellectual property, personally identifiable information, or other financial stuff of financial impact. And they're going to try to steal that. They're going to stage that. Usually we'll find 7-zip or RAR on there where they're getting ready to zip stuff out and send it out. We'll find WinSCP, which is an FTP tool where they're going to send it to the cloud. They exfiltrate all your data. Then they start encrypting everything and charge you a Bitcoin ransom, or say they're going to, we're going to put this out there and embarrass you unless you pay us some money. But everything along that chain, that attack chain, has a signature, right? We can see it happening if you're watching, if you know what to watch for. When I feel sorry for these companies, I'm just guessing, I don't know about the situation with the pipeline, or was it JBS Foods or some of these other ones recently where we've seen them get shut down and pay, a $12 million ransom. I just think they may not have been watching. Like, they didn't know what they didn't know. They didn't have somebody eyes on glass 24/7 watching the matrix and seeing if any of these indicators of compromise were happening. And if they did, stepping in and escalating those and doing additional, analysis and threat hunting. If they didn't have that capability, that's why they got hit.
Right. And Dick, I think I heard you chime in. You said single pane of glass, right? So that makes a lot of sense. It's just,
well, and then, Jeremy got there with that term visibility, right?
Right.
And that's something that I have promoted. While that's a skill set that requires quite a bit of understanding, that's actually something that for a lot of organizations, if you've got a more junior person or kind of what you would consider an entry level type thing, that is a great place to drop somebody as far as your junior people. Put them in front of that single pane of glass and say, this thing's going to do half the work for you. It's going to tell you when something's wrong. And then you kind of teach them by responding to those alarms, and they can learn a lot from that. And then, essentially you can grow a one-person SOC, if you will, out of using those kind of tools and having somebody that's really focused on it. So it's a great way to kind of maximize the bang for your buck out of junior people as well. So
it's funny you should say that. And I know communication is a huge factor when it comes to this as well. What kind of communication would you use to help increase the emphasis on security when it comes to the new marketplace?
Well, I'm in a kind of a medium-sized organization, but we're dispersed. And I think there's a lot of companies that are like this. You don't work out all out of one place. So your employees expect messaging to come to them in different methods, right? And especially from leadership. So for me, what I often try to do is I try and make our security manager, whoever that is, the voice of the program. I try and ask them to communicate a lot, even if it's generic messaging. I want the senior leadership, the C-suite, to be talking to the employees about security. The CISO is really, that's their job, but I also want that language to be baked into other messaging that comes from senior leaders, so that everybody hears it in kind of different ways, and it gets emphasis from different people.
Gotcha.
And beyond that, there's also, like we have a distributed enterprise. So I've got a lot of my employees log into the same webpage to look for information or to do their work. So that's a good place, again, to post reminders or just those little updates, or it doesn't have to be this great, long, in-depth video. It's just something that's just that little touch point, that exposure. Remember,
right,
things that require security, that require that mindset. And so get it into their day in different ways through different channels, even if it's not a beat you over the head kind of thing. It's just those tones to say, remember, we're all here working on the security program together, and, start at that senior level, but then infiltrate their day through different ways so that they're always thinking about it.
That takes work. It takes persistence.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to overcome a lot of frustration, I'm sure, because from top to bottom, everybody's got it.
There is over communicating. I had, when I was the security officer of this organization, my own boss said, I want you to do something every single week. And I want, these big, bold letters, and I want this, this, and this. And I said, I think that's almost too much. If I do it every week, and especially if I do it on a standard, every Friday afternoon, you're going to have 10 people that really like to read it. And you're going to have 1,000 people that it's automatically in the trash, So, I'd rather ask those 10 people to come see me once a month and let's talk about security. I need a different way to communicate with the rest of the employees, and oversaturation is the thing. So you have to pay attention and kind of right size it for what you think your user base can pay attention to.
Awesome.
I saw this argument made the other day that I don't think phishing your own employees is a good idea, because they already don't like IT, and now you're making them mistrust IT, like they're tricking you. Mm-hmm. But I have to disagree with that, because anytime you're going to allow communications to come into and out of your environment, you're going to have to train the people, right? Because they can subvert the other security mechanisms you have in place, right? No matter what I do, network security wise, I can't keep somebody from picking up the phone and giving out their password over the phone, right? So that has to be trained. I can't teach somebody not to respond to the email from the CEO that says, hey, I wanted to honor some people with some gift cards. So go run to the store, run to CVS and get some gift cards, scratch them off and then give me the numbers. Right? There's no security mechanism I can put in place in my environment that's going to keep that from happening. Right? Because there's no malware involved. Yeah, well, you say that. Not so common because we've seen that one many times. There's no security control in place from a technical standpoint that's going to keep people from sending that wire transfer to the new routing number, right? Unless they're trained. So I do think you have to train people, and just like in college, you had your lecture, and then you had your lab, where lecture is just a theory and the lab is a hands-on. I think you should train people with videos and in-person seminars and things like that, and then I think you should fish them from time to time. Send them that fake phishing email to keep them on their toes, because that reinforces the message on a regular basis.
We've been talking a lot about defense, a lot about things that we can do to prevent and all these things. Jeremy, you're an adjunct professor actually for the University of South Florida, is that correct?
Yep.
You're also a founder of the University of South Florida White Hatters Computer Security Club. Now, it's a burning question in the back of my head. I feel like we have some of the best minds in cybersecurity, not only in our industry, but even on this call to some degree. What are some of the things, why aren't we able to hack back? Why aren't we able to attack the attackers? Have you ever thought about doing something like that?
Well, sure. There's a few issues here. Well, number one is FBI says, the federal government says we can't do it, right? Because there's something like Title 10 and Title 50 that says that's the purview of our military and of our intelligence community. So they don't allow us to go and hack back to like foreign nation states because it could be considered an act of war. But the other reason is it could turn you into a criminal yourself. A lot of times these attacks are they're proxied through many different locations, and they may even be launched from a compromised site. So like they'll first go and compromise, some environment, and then they'll use that as a launching point for an attack on your environment. So if I attack back, I would be double victimizing this poor person that got hit in the first place. But beyond that, I would say attribution is very difficult. We used to be, a lot of our forensic investigations, we were very concerned with what they call silver platter doctrine, which is handling everything by the book, chain of custody for the evidence, bitstream copies of everything, so that we could hand it off to law enforcement should prosecution be the goal of the investigation. Well, it's never the goal. I mean, now, right? Getting up and running again, that's the goal. Making sure that this can never happen again, that's the goal. Understanding who attacked me and bringing them to justice, not really the goal, right? Attribution is very, very difficult, and it's probably the attack's probably coming in from a country where we don't have any kind of legal reciprocity or extradition, right? And so we're not going to be able to bring them to justice. So the Wild Wild West says, yeah, I should hack back and bring them down just like they try to bring me down. But I don't think that's probably the right way to go. I think being proactive, ensuring, like I said before, that we put in the defenses and prevention as much as possible, but be able to detect and respond and improve and correct. That's the new normal. That's the new world we live in now.
Let me ask you this, because this has kind of been a question as well. There's tons of new technology that's coming out here. There is, of course, IoT, there is artificial intelligence and all these things. And this is kind of a question for all the panelists here. How do some of these concepts play a role into the future of cybersecurity? I mean, I heard a couple of years back, there was a casino out in Vegas that got hacked. And how did they do it? There was an IoT device on a fish tank, and they were able to hack in and just have free reign and do what they needed to do. So how do you feel that these new technologies are playing a role in security? I guess, Dick, we'll start with you.
Well, IoT security is just a personal passion of mine. I think that it falls right back into that same behavior issues of what we were talking about earlier, and that the way that people interact with IoT devices is just different than the way we interact with our laptop, right? Like Peter said earlier, you know your laptop has these security things built into it. You installed the antivirus. You turned on these configurations, so you know what's there, and you trust it. And so when you interact with it, you know the level of protection that you have. When you interact with an IoT device, whether it's something really simple, like I have a Dyson Air fan, that's an IoT device. It's Wi-Fi connected. Or if it's something really high risk and complex, like a medical device, you don't interact with it the same way you interact with a regular computer. So as the user, it's really hard for you to understand what kind of protections are in place for you, or even worse, what are the gaps? What's lacking? So for me, I know that one, I just think that it's this lurking monster inside the security kind of enterprise that we're all waiting for something to happen. And I know that, there's been issues, there have already been some, but as we continue to populate our society and our lives with more and more devices, we're really waiting for something bad to happen. So, for me, that's really a big place. It's not as, and it touches everything. It touches your personal life to your corporate, workplace. So that's one that I'm spending a lot of my personal time kind of thinking about and focused on.
Great to know.
Dick, I saw recently that you submitted some IoT papers to NIST. What would you say to, I've been following some new recommendation from FBI about separating OT, operational technologies, from information technology. I also know that many manufacturing companies or industrial control systems are now using IoT devices with, sometimes some of them have web services in them, some of them are using Linux. What are your recommendations for how to manage IoT devices in an enterprise? Should they be looked at as OT and separate from IT? And what do you think about that?
That's going to come down to kind of the use case of the device, right? But if you can, or, if it's possible, like let's say something, doors, security doors are one. You've got a camera, but then you also have some sensor that tells you whether the door is open or closed, right? Maybe that camera can't be segmented off into some other portion, but all those other devices that aren't providing that look that a person has to interact with, you can probably do some network segmentation there. So you're right. If you treat those IoT deployments as more like an OT device, because you're not going to have a human interacting with it every day, you're going to be relying on it for a really specific purpose that you want to set and forget. That's the behavior pattern around that device. Then yeah, you should probably treat it differently than the rest of your assets that you do interact with often and observe constantly. Yeah, you should have some sort of separation, both on the network and on your tools that observe the network, to see if that is ever being breached or crossed.
So if you don't mind, Fred, I have a quick follow-up to that for both
Sure.
Fred and for Dick and Jeremy. So then would you then say, Dick, when we talk about zero trust, would you say part of that segmentation, it's central to the idea of zero trust, or is it something different for our audience?
Well, I think what I've noticed I guess this is my own experience, is that being in a government position, we are still probably further back in time as far as being more perimeter based and being more, we've got our castle, we've got our wall, and we've got our good stuff on the inside, bad guys on the outside. We are being pulled by, and Jeremy was making these comments earlier, what I could hear him saying is, we're being pulled by the current of the cloud and software as a service. We're leading to purchase decisions where we can no longer really maintain that on-prem control of certain things. It's just not available, or it's not offered to be sold in that way. So even if we, from a operational perspective, feel like we have a need to stay in that perimeter type setup, the cloud is pulling us up to the cloud whether we want to or not.
Okay.
So what I've kind of adopted a mentality is that while that migration happens naturally and incrementally as we continue to just make purchases and shift that way, that zero trust will almost certainly be part of that migration along the way. There'll be some key points where you have to establish something to make zero trust work, and you'll have some kind of markers in that timeline. But I think there'll be a lot of decisions that you make where you can co-opt the move to the cloud with some other authentication move, and you're starting to affect your zero trust architecture without one big overwhelming deployment. You can kind of incrementally bring it in with new services and new applications.
Now, there's something kind of interesting about what you say, and you hear buzzwords being thrown around a lot, like zero trust. I've actually spoken with a number of organizations and even IT executives who have no idea what zero trust is. Do you care to elaborate a little bit more for us, Jeremy, what your understanding of zero trust and why it should be something that we're all shooting for?
And my notion, I think I kind of laid this out a little bit earlier, is to me, besides by the way, segmentation is really hard. I don't know. I think in the Colonial Pipeline situation, they probably couldn't say for certain that there was a 100% separation between their IT and OT networks, which is why they ended up shutting everything down and ended up paying the ransom. We saw this few weeks ago, or a few months ago, during the Super Bowl weekend here in Tampa Bay, the Oldsmar Water Treatment Center.
Yes.
There's this guy working in the middle of the night, and all of a sudden he sees the cursor moving on his screen, and he sees, he's like figuring it's probably the IT guys doing something, until they go down to the sodium hydroxide levels for the water and raise those by 100 times normal, right? And that's bad. And he was able to back it out and stop it, and they were able to cut off the connection, but it was basically misconfigured TeamViewer, right? It was an older version of TeamViewer, and it had, I guess they had somehow stolen the password or did credential stuffing or something like that. But imagine if that guy were on coffee break or going to the bathroom or something, and there weren't anybody monitoring what might have happened, right? So I think that really begs the question, especially in our industrial control systems for critical infrastructure protection, why in the world would you ever allow a remote access into a system that could possibly be connected to physical systems like that, right? That has to be air gap, there has to be the separation there. But I'm just telling you from a pen testing standpoint, I've pen tested networks that have what's called a NAC, network access control, where they try to, through MAC address, control, they say, I'm not going to let anything connect, or there's a couple of ways, right? There's 802.1x, right, which is LAN level port security. But there's also, if you don't have a way to install, say, a certificate into an embedded device, you're going to have to identify that device somehow on the network. So usually what they use is a hardware MAC address. All I have to do is take a little tool from Hack5 called a LAN turtle or a bash bunny or one of these, and put it, or no, it's packet squirrel, I think it is. They all have great names, right? And you just put that in line between that device and the rest of the Ethernet port, and now I can grab the MAC address, and then I just go in and change my device to whatever that MAC address is, and now it lets me on, right? So I bypass the NAC. So I think segmentation, like I said, is difficult. I think you probably do want to concentrate on air gapping it from, especially for critical infrastructure controls from anything that could possibly be reached remotely over the network. Awesome. Another thing, I'm gonna give you some other shadow IT we talked about earlier. This is one that doesn't always fall under the purview of IT security. Social media. How much of your business is run on social media? You use LinkedIn for HR and hiring. You use Instagram and Facebook and Twitter for public relations. I see people that do help desk support over Twitter, right? And yet, is any of that under centralized visibility and control of IT? Probably not. It's probably run by the marketing department or the HR department. So I would call them security amateurs, right? It probably doesn't have multi-factor authentication set up. It doesn't have monitoring for spoofed accounts and account takeovers, stuff like that. And so that's another area of shadow IT, just as dangerous and probably more so than OT in many cases, that people overlook in their security plan.
Interesting. I would have never thought about that. All great points. Well, those of you who are attending, we will now open up the floor for any questions that you might have. You can go ahead into the bottom window where it says Q&A, and you can post your questions there if you do have any. Just let us know which one of the panelists the question is for. If you just want it openly answered, we can do that as well. But just for the sake of time, we're just going to open up the floor for any questions at this point. We do have one question that came to us.
They're asking about more regulation, and I'm a small government person. I'm kind of for less regulation, but in many cases, we find out that I'm going to speak to this one real quick. That these industry sectors that are most serious about cybersecurity are the ones that are heavily regulated. So, for example, healthcare, they've got the HIPAA security rule, banking and finance, government contractors. especially DoD now has this very, strict set of emerging controls, CMMC, the Cyber Maturity Model Certification. So that's where you're going to have a third party come in and verify you against a certain level of maturity against these standards. So I am kind of for that in a way, but I'm unfortunately, I guess industry, regulation hasn't driven good enough behavior. Maybe PCI DSS is a good start, people handling payment cards. But for the most part, we find in the unregulated, if you will, industries, they're just not very, serious about cybersecurity. And so another area we've seen driving cybersecurity, of course, is privacy. So you've got the CCPA, California Consumer Privacy Act. You've got the New York Shield. You've got Nevada, I think, has one. 17 other states have pending privacy legislation, and that's going to drive cybersecurity best practices. And I heard it mentioned earlier about insurance. You're not even going to be able to pick up a cyber breach policy unless you're meeting some due diligence requirements. They're probably not going to pay out if you fill out the thing and then they come to find out you didn't have any of that stuff in place that you said you had. And then another issue I've heard is that if it's a nation state sponsored attack considered an act of war, they have a clause, a get out of, they don't have to pay on that either. So a lot of times you'd like to say cyber breach insurance you definitely need to have in place, but it could be driving bad behavior because people think it's a catch-all for everything.
Exactly.
Where it shouldn't be a substitute for security. It should be, your safety net.
That's a good point. And I would even say that if you did have an incident that was as a result of your negligence, there should probably be some points against you, maybe if you do have a certification. I don't know. This is just kind of me thinking off the cuff. David, I'm sorry, Dick, you had a question?
Yeah, I have something that I think it's complementary to Jeremy's comments there. I agree that I want the industry to be better. I wish the government didn't have to enforce these rules so that we could protect consumers.
Right.
I think something that as consumers, and even as us as professionals kind of inside the industry, what we forget is all this stuff we're talking about is crime. This is criminal activity. This is fraud. These are people stealing things from you. They're not walking by and stealing an item from you, but they are committing crimes. And so while we want to deal with this as an industry, as consumers, as something else, when you really put it on paper, you say, these are crimes, right? And now these are crimes that are being committed across international boundaries even. So that begs for government involvement. What's the right kind? What makes sense? How do you do law enforcement at the same time as improving security controls? Those are two totally different problem sets. You don't want one government agency trying to handle both of those things because they're not the same. So the ball of wax is huge, but it just needs that government influence. It needs it, or like Jeremy said, the industries that don't have the government influence don't do it. The industries that do it, and they tend to do it well. So the proof is in that pudding right there. And it's a sad reality, but it is where we're at. And as long as we all continue to, if we can shift our mindset from a nuisance to crime and think about this as preventing crime or preventing fraud, then I think that brings the emphasis that your regular user needs to understand of how serious some of this stuff really is.
Very well put.
There's a question from Josh, Fred, from Josh Lieberman. If I could answer real quick.
Oh yeah, sure, please.
You're correct about some of the challenges, and I happen to know Josh is a service provider. One of the things that Dick was saying is about the fact that hackers don't just reach you on day one. They get in, they do a lot of reconnaissance, they check what's going on, they plan, they feed down, and they deploy some ransomware. The challenges for MSPs, which Josh is one of those, is how do you even train one engineer to manage all those multiple dashboards, even if you're able to get it to your customers. So it may be easy for a corporate entity. It's almost impossible for a service provider who's not an MSSP. So one of the things that there's a document that I found on Abacode's website. I think it's about 24-hour series of trying to prevent attacks. So I'm going to recommend for our team, and if Jeremy approves, we're going to send a recording of this to all attendees. Maybe if Jeremy approves, can send that document, that PDF, for people to see some of the things that you've been through in trying to prevent attack. I think some of our MSP partners could really benefit from some of those lessons that Jeremy and Abacode is actually finding, if you're okay with it. So I just want to kind of, and I know we're almost out of time here.
Make that available.
Exactly. I want to give a quick closing remark. One thing I want to enjoin all of the executives on this call, if you're a CEO of a company, the question you should be asking yourself is, are you set up in such a way that you could survive a cyber attack? You need to ask yourself that question. The answer better be yes. If the answer is no, you need to take concrete actions. Insurance alone is not going to prevent. If you assume that if I get breached, my insurance will pay, better make sure it's the correct insurance, and that some of the responsibility of the insurance company actually ties out when you come to a claim. Because if they find out that you say you have MFO admins and you don't have it, they can deny your claim. So I'm going to kind of hand off to you, Fred, to go and maybe closing remarks from Jeremy.
Excellent. Anybody else have something to add there? I mean, I know, Jeremy, there's a lot of things that you told us to do that we can prevent or kind of serve as defense or best practices. But obviously, if something does happen and I'm breached, you're the guy to see, right? So just real quick, do you have any closing remarks in terms of maybe some best practices if you happen to be a victim of one of these attacks?
Yeah, I mean, we know that there's a 4 million person worldwide shortage of cybersecurity talent right now. It's very hard to find qualified people. So I would say, engage with a third party that already has those experts. It's a niche area. IT and IT security are two separate things now. IT is the central nervous system of the body. IT security is your immune system, right? They're completely different. And you wouldn't ask, you wouldn't ask a general practitioner to be your brain surgeon, right? I mean, they're two different disciplines. So I would say, engage with a trusted third party who already has the people in place and can help you do it. If that's all they do all day, every day, they can probably do it more efficiently and probably cheaper than you can yourself by hiring those resources. In our case, a lot of stuff we talked about today in terms of the remote desktop attacks, training, regulation, all that stuff. I have blogged about a lot of that stuff, so I'll put it in the chat. Just go to the Abacode blog site and read up on some other blogs. One of the things we didn't hit on we touched on a little bit, but is these SSL VPN vulnerabilities. We've seen these a lot. Palo Alto, FortiGate, Cisco, Pulse Secure, all these want to have some kind of web services in them, and so they roll their own, out of some old version of Apache, and none of them are any good, and they're all exploitable, and so they keep running into problems, and so you got to be on top of that. And even in fact, I would disable that altogether. If you have to run it, we have some advice on. There's a NIST guide to running SSL VPN correctly. So I'll put in the chat a link to my blog posts, and feel free to look those up afterwards.
Thank you. We do appreciate that. Well, everyone, it seems our hour is up. I do appreciate you spending the time with us. Hopefully you've learned something. And if you knew everything that we talked about, hopefully it just reiterated what you knew and, just help to prevent some of these things from happening and spread the word. A lot of times we have access to knowledge and we just think everybody knows it, but you'd be surprised who doesn't know it. So just spread the word on best practices and things that that are working for you. And to the guests, to our panelists, I do appreciate you spending the time with us. It's been a pleasure. We look forward to hopefully doing one of these again sometime in the near future. Just as a reminder, this session was recorded and you'll be sent the link to the recording in the next couple of days. So once again, I do appreciate you joining us, and have a wonderful day, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you,
Peter, Fred.
Jeremy.
Take care, Dick.
Thanks a
Cheers.
lot, everyone.